everybody. I hope you can all hear me. We're so glad you're all here for this special presentation with a very special guest from Shenandoah National Park. My name is Anna Pachias. I'm the annual fund director for the Shenandoah National Park Trust, which is the official philanthropic partner for Shenandoah National Park. And before we get started, just a quick overview of who we are and what we do. We invest in projects and programs that help protect, enhance, and preserve Shenandoah today, tomorrow, and for many years to come. We run a wide variety of projects and programs that would not get funding from federal allocations. So our donors' support makes those programs possible. We organize our work into 4 pillars: Wild Shenandoah, Experience Shenandoah, Stewards of Shenandoah, and Stories of Shenandoah. And each one deals with certain aspects of what the park needs. Wild Shenandoah deals with fighting invasives, protecting the tree canopy and watersheds, and the flora and fauna. Experience Shenandoah centers on the visitor experience, maintaining trails and overlooks, funding volunteer coordinators, and our ever popular Artist in Residence program. Stewards of Shenandoah develops the next generation of park protectors and stewards through virtual and in-person learning, education programs, after-school programs, workforce development, and internships. And the Stories of Shenandoah invests in interactive, historic, and cultural storytelling that helps us to understand and appreciate Virginia's history and culture. So that's what we do. And now let's get started. It's my pleasure to introduce you to our special guest, Bridget Harrison, Assistant Engine Captain at Shenandoah National Park. Bridget Harrison began her career in Wildfire in 2017 as a Student Conservation Association intern at Piedmont National Wildlife Refuge. She then worked as a biological science technician for Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania National Military Park, as well as Shenandoah. And there she focused on invasive plant treatment, native plant restoration, volunteer coordination. At the same time, she was also serving as a collateral duty firefighter. For the past 2 years, Bridget has served as a primary duty firefighter at Shenandoah in the role of senior firefighter, and more recently, she started her role as assistant engine captain. She has 7 years of experience in wildland and prescribed fires, including involvement in the park's most recent fires. Her qualifications include squad boss, type 5 incident commander, and resource advisor. She is now working towards her engine boss qualification, and she hopes to serve Shenandoah National Park for many years to come. We're very fortunate to have her here this evening, and after her presentation, there will be time for Q&A, so please feel free to put your questions in the chat. My colleagues and I will monitor those. And now, Bridget, welcome. We are so excited to have you here with us.
Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for that great introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you all can see my presentation. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about fire management at Shenandoah National Park. And can everyone hear and see me okay?
Looks good.
Okay, great. So, I'm Bridget Harrison, Assistant Engine Captain here at Shenandoah National Park. I work for the Mountains to Seas Zone as well. And let me see. So today we will discuss fire as a natural process for healthy ecosystems, how fires are managed, the impacts of fires on public lands, what we do to prevent fires at Shenandoah National Park, what we do when there are no fires, the most recent fires, Quaker Run, Royal Orchard, and Rocky Branch, and how to have a fire-wise home, and how to recreate responsibly when you're here at the park. So starting off with fire as a natural process, though human-caused ignitions are the leading cause of wildfires, we do get natural-caused fires. So these would be considered fires as a natural process. Often they are lightning strike fires. An example of this is Miller's Head, which is pictured in the background here. It was a confirmed lightning strike fire in September of 2023. It was in a very remote area, kind of down slope from Skyland. It took about an hour and a half just to hike out to this fire. It was a really interesting one. And fire is also a natural part of the ecosystem processes and has been for long before land management agencies existed. A history of fire suppression and exclusion has actually left some areas more prone to extreme fire behavior due to a heavy fuel load. And we'll discuss that a little more later, what is fuel. And then there are some species that are actually fire dependent, such as Table Mountain pine, which is found in Shenandoah National Park. When present in the right intensity and frequency, fire can actually promote diversity of plants and wildlife and decrease the risk of a future high intensity wildfire that would be more catastrophic. And this can all benefit plants, animals, and humans. And just a little extra note, I'm sure a lot of people know and have thought about the role of Indigenous people in fire as a natural process. There are actually a lot of tribes that view fire as medicine, and some would actually describe a wildfire as an overdose. So there was a lot of intentional kind of early prescribed burning in a lot of tribal culture. And that's just a really interesting piece of history to look into if you haven't yet. And so moving on to how do we actually manage a wildfire? So there are managed fires versus full suppression fires. A managed fire is often going to be in a wilderness area, kind of way off from structures, not really likely to affect the kind of wildland urban interface. You're also able to just kind of monitor these fires or work with them and around them. So you can actually more easily choose to, if you say, let the fire burn to a more natural containment area, you can pick more moderate weather to do a burnout operation in. You can be more selective with the fuels you add fire to, and you can more easily choose your terrain, which can greatly aid in firefighter safety, you know, as opposed to some of these rocky slopes we have in the park that can be very risky to work around. And this is not an easy decision to make. It's a very complex decision that has to go through some processes to be approved, and it has to have very specific objectives of improving the habitat versus doing a full suppression on this fire. And then on the other spectrum, you do have the full suppression fires. These are going to be anywhere from sometimes actually in the wilderness, if that's the decision that is made, or in what we call the wildland urban interface. So kind of near homes, lodges, anything of concern. You don't really get to be as selective with your weather, your fuel load, and your topography. And the objective is just get the fire out. So that is often the choice that is made. And let me just see. Yeah, so going on next to the Quaker Run fire, we do get a lot of questions about this fire being one of our more recent ones and really making the news a lot. In October of 2023, it was deemed a lightning caused fire. It reached just under 4,000 acres by the time it was done. And this included 700 acres of Shenandoah National Park. With dry conditions, the Keach Byram Drought Index was actually in the 400s, meaning containment would be difficult. So this number of 400 basically means the first 4 inches of fuel were available to burn. So that duff layer that you see in the forest before you get to the mineral soil, that's how deep this fire was burning, making it just very hard to get a full containment line around. It actually started on private land near the Rapidan Wildlife Management Area. State resources were there from the beginning, working on containment. Over the following days, the Virginia Department of Forestry called in their incident management team and utilized unified command to include Park Service staff in the planning process. And with the complexity of the growing fire, more resources were needed and a national IMT was ordered. And let me move this out of the way. And then we also did have some negative impacts from this fire to the Big Meadows area. The power had to be shut off to make work safer for firefighters on the ground. And major efforts were also put into structure protection of private homes in the area, the Rapidan Fish Camp, and Camp Hoover, of course. They set up sprinkler systems, hose lays. They were staging engines near structures to make sure that when the fire did reach these structures, they were safe. And so then not too long after Quaker Run, we had Royal Orchard. This was November of 2023. It totaled 21 acres, and it was actually caused by a vehicle fire on I-64. State resources were the first on scene. The fire was mostly on private land. The Virginia Department of Forestry, Department of Cultural and Natural Resources, U.S. Forest Service, and Diamond Fire and Forestry contract crew resources were together working on containment from the beginning. And it did actually burn to the Appalachian Trail corridor in the park and kind of that narrow southern boundary of the park. And one thing of note is the aviation resources really helped to make the first shift successful. Fortunately, the Forest Service had some helicopters staged nearby, and we were able to utilize them to make some bucket drops on this fire to keep it smaller and really make our lives easier. And then most recently, we had the Rocky Branch fire. So a little background on that. March 20th was a red flag day with over 60 fire starts in just 10 counties. We were seeing just crazy wind gusts. Most of these were power line caused fires, including Rocky Branch, which grew to just under 1,000 acres in 24 hours. Final acres were totaling 1,014. And it was just crazy to be working on this fire. You know, we don't get a lot of red flag days in the area where the weather and the conditions are just prime for a fire to spread quickly. And our work on this fire was largely based around protecting some structures that were down below the park boundary, making sure those were secured before we went to contain it, because there was just no containing it in the first shift to begin with. So there were wind gusts of 60 miles per hour recorded in our region. Resources from Company 1 in Luray quickly arrived on scene, followed by park personnel. And due to several other fires in Page County, resources were very thin. I'm sure a lot of you saw the news about some of the fires on the forest and on private land that grew to thousands of acres. It was quite a complex. And an IMT, incident management team, was ordered to aid in resource ordering and incident organization. And resources came from across the country to help contain the fire. And that is really amazing, because this time, you know, early spring, March, there's not really a lot of fire resources on yet out west because it's not quite their same fire season. So we rely heavily on what's available locally. And we were very lucky to get the crews to come out and help us. And there are a lot of impacts on public lands from wildfires. There's positives and negatives. A big negative being closures. You know, it can be very disappointing to show up to the park and not be able to go about your day as planned. But, you know, firefighter and public safety are number one always. Closures, power outages, they all have negative impacts on revenue and public enjoyment, but they are necessary for many reasons. The next priority in values is property. So homes, the historic structures in the park, lodging, really anything that is of value that could be lost. And then we've, of course, got the natural resources, the plants, the animals, the waters, and the soils. So some of the positives that can come from a wildfire include fuel reduction. This helps improve our odds of not having another catastrophic fire in that area in coming years. There are fire-dependent species in the park, as I discussed a little bit earlier. And so some of them actually need fire to release their seed. It can regenerate oak and hickory forests, which are a dominant forest type here at the park. And it can promote diverse wildlife habitat and forage. It can convert nutrients into more available forms for the soil. And just a little bit more of a note on that, you know, forage. There's some interesting research out there that year or two after a fire comes through, you'll actually see more flowers, more beneficial pollinator habitat, more of those easy to forage species like serviceberry, blueberry, things like that, that really bring in the wildlife and increase forage for humans too. And so some of the negatives, you've always got the possible threat of life and property. Intense fires can actually be stand replacing and create erosion, which produces pollution for waterways, and some of the viewscapes can be negatively impacted. If you've ever been to the South District of the park and seen where the Rocky Mount fire scar is, it definitely creates a different landscape. There was a few areas where the fire burned pretty intensely, and you can kind of see these little bare matchstick snags scattered all over the hillside. If you haven't been to that overlook yet, check it out. It's pretty interesting, and you can still see some of the evidence of the fire hiking through that area. And then there's also the potential to spread invasive plants. So not necessarily from place to place, but that can happen via seed dispersion and boot treads and things like that. But the real potential is you have a high intensity fire that comes through. Invasive plants love that disturbance, and they will just flourish right after a fire. And there's a lot of effort after fires here to do invasive plant control as like a post-treatment. And one important topic I'd like to talk to you about is definitely recreating responsibly. This can kind of mitigate your risk of starting a wildfire. So some of the things you can consider are there fire restrictions in place, and what does that look like? Here, it's typically a ban on open air fires and fire rings, but in some Western states, they actually have restrictions that go up to you can't even use your camp stove. I've never seen us go to that level of restriction, but if you're ever in doubt, check the park website. And just knowing the other restrictions on fires in the park, it must always be in a man-made fire ring. you can generally tell the difference pretty easily. Man-made fire rings are generally going to be a metal ring. It may be surrounded by stone. You're going to find them in developed areas and some of the backcountry structures, like the overnight shelters on the Appalachian Trail. These are safe places to have fires. But if you see someone's just built a wimpy little fire ring out of rocks, we recommend, if it's a cold and out fire, no one's just abandoned their campfire, you can actually disperse those rocks. It's a big help to try to mitigate the risk of someone else coming, seeing that, and thinking it's okay to use it. You also want to consider the location of your fire in relation to fuels. Let's say you do go to a picnic ground and you want to build a campfire. Look around that fire ring and make sure you've got a nice clearing away from leaf litter, anything that's going to easily carry a spark. Know about the amount of fuel you're adding to your fire. So consider, if you put a large log in there, is that actually going to burn by the time you want to leave? Probably not. You could be adding a lot more effort to actually extinguishing that fire. So consider using smaller debris, splitting up your firewood more, not adding that last log. And then you also want to consider your access to water. How are you going to put your fire out? So a lot of the campgrounds and picnic areas, they have frost-free spigots, but did you bring something you can tote that water around in? If you're somewhere else, maybe in the back country using an AT structure, your 12-ounce water bottle isn't really going to be enough to put out a fire. So know how to check your fire for heat. When is it actually safe to leave? It needs to be cold to the touch completely. And then another thing to consider is the weather. Knowing your fire weather conditions would include your temperature, your relative humidity, the drought index, winds for the day, and days since rain. So those can all stack up to really create the conditions for a fire spread. If you have really low relative humidity, that's a big red flag. And as temperatures increase and RHs decrease, you've just got a higher risk there. And of course, the wind, fire is largely going to be wind driven. So that's just another thing to consider. And off to the side here, I've got the two different fire triangles. You've got oxygen, heat, and fuel, and those combine to make fire. You take one away, so you take oxygen away, smothers the fire. You take fuel away from the fire, there are no flames. And then you've got the fire behavior triangle, where weather, topography, and fuels stack up to create kind of a severity of a fire. And I'm sure all of you are familiar with Smokey Bear. Your town might even have one of the fire danger signs up. And if you've got someone who's really good at keeping it updated, you can check that as well to see if fire danger is low or all the way to extreme. And, what should you do if there is a wildfire, if you started one, if you see one off in the distance? The best thing to do is, get as accurate of a location description as you can, a general size of the fire, and you want to report this to the communications center that we have. If possible, you can find those numbers on a lot of the information signs, but it's 540-999-3422. If in doubt, you can always call 911 and they will relay the information to our communications center. And if you can't get a call out, anything like that, you could always find a park ranger, go to the nearest visitor center and tell them what you found. If it's just like a smoldering campfire, that's definitely still worth reporting if it's off the side of a trail somewhere and there's real risk of it spreading. Just, let someone know the best descriptive location that you can, because it can be really hard to find some of these, backcountry fires when someone might have already dumped a bunch of water on it, and then you're scratching your head looking around for a potential abandoned campfire that is no longer of concern. So just give as much information as you can. Take a picture, give a GPS coordinate if you can. Most smartphones have really easy ways to check those things now. So, and another great topic is fire-wise homes. So, what is a fire-wise home? It's going to be more resilient in the chance that there is a wildfire. It's going to be more easily defendable for firefighters. So instead of having to spend hours clearing debris from someone's home, the work has already been done. They might be able to set up a sprinkler kit, do minimal work, and call that structure good, and be able to move on to protecting other structures. Things you want to consider are your gutters cleaned, your chimney cleaned and screened off. You want at least 30 feet of cleared minimal vegetation, kept green, 70-foot area of lawn mowed, and 100 feet of thinned trees and brush. So reducing that density of the vegetation a little bit just for the 100 feet around your home. This might take some coordination with your neighbors. And you want to also avoid outdoor burning brush piles. That is a big way that human-caused fires happen. You want to keep your combustibles 30 feet or more away from your home. Keep flammables properly stored in a shed away from your home, and label them if possible, so that way if someone does have to handle those materials, they know what they're dealing with. You want to make sure your driveway is accessible and clearly labeled. And one really great fundraiser that a lot of fire departments do is actually selling the big green and white address placards. So that would be a great thing to do if you don't have one already. And you want to think about the ingress and egress of your home. So think, can a type 1 fire engine make it to your house? I've been to some communities that actually border the park where there's these really narrow switchback roads that your typical really long type 1 fire engine is probably not going to be able to make it to a home. So you have to consider those risks when you're, purchasing a home. If you've already purchased that home, what are some things you can do to mitigate that risk? And then another great thing is keeping a garden hose readily accessible, 100-foot length or greater, so you can kind of get a good radius around your home. A question we get a lot: what do you do when there are no fires? So there's a lot of different things we do. We participate in prescribed burning. So sometimes that's on the park here. We did the Big Meadows burn earlier this spring. We burned 2 of the 3 units that are up there, and they're typically done 1 unit a year. They fell behind a little bit in the past year or 2. So we caught up with that, and it should be 1 unit burned annually from here. We recently did a prescribed burn at Cold Harbor Battlefield at Richmond. And we actually burn at a number of the battlefields at our kind of sister sites that you can see on the map. And some of those are also kind of a cultural resource burn where we are trying to help maintain the battlefield landscape. We also work on defensible space. So that's kind of the same idea as Firewise. So we go to structures throughout the park, think about what they would need to be defended in the case of a wildfire, and do the work to mitigate the fuels around those structures. We also do structure assessments. which kind of go hand in hand with the defensible space, taking pictures, describing the ingress and egress, and making that information available so we can share it with other fire departments in the case that there is a fire. We also spend a fair amount of time clearing fire roads, making sure we can still get down them, making notes on the size of vehicle that could use them, or if there's any issues with the road surface not being passable. We also maintain our readiness. This includes various trainings, keeping up with equipment, doing preventative maintenance, doing physical training. We also go on assignments to other public lands, so we can assist other agencies when our fire danger is lower here. We can go to Western states and help them when they have staffing needs. And sometimes this could also be an assignment to a large fire, an ongoing incident. It can be a great way for us to work on our qualifications while also helping other public lands. And then we have various projects at our Mountains to Seas zone units. So we'll also go there and do similar defensible space and structure assessments. And then this is just an image I wanted to share of the effectiveness of a fuel treatment. This is not my image, it's from firescience.gov. So you can see where there was this intense crown fire that was burning, and it reached a fuel treatment area where it was kind of a shaded fuel break. The idea isn't to remove all the trees, but just thin them enough to reduce the intensity of the fire going through that area. And you can see the impact it made in the residential area where the trees are largely still green. It really helped make that area more defendable. And then these are some additional resources I wanted to share. I believe there will be a follow-up email where I can share some of these with you, but the Southern Area Coordination Center website has predictive service maps that show what areas are kind of in the red or in high fire danger for the month. They also have different kind of weather services. There's, of course, the NOAA fire weather dashboard. You can find that by Googling it, and it's pretty great. It basically gives you a spot weather forecast. You can scroll around on the map and pinpoint where you want to go for the day. You can see what the temperature, the winds, the relative humidity are. It's probably a little overboard for anyone who's just using it recreationally, but it's really great information. And if you're interested in doing more research on Firewise homes, the Virginia Department of Forestry is a great resource. If you go to their website, they have all kinds of resources on Firewise and how to reach out to your neighbors if you want to make a Firewise community. And there are even people who will come out and help you do a site visit and tell you these are the things that I think you should do. And then, of course, always check the park website before you visit for any restrictions or warnings. It's going to be the best place to look. Social media is good too. They really do a great job of updating the Facebook and the Instagram. But when in doubt, just check the park website. And I just wanted to say thank you to the Shenandoah National Park Trust for hosting events like these and supporting Shenandoah National Park in so many ways. And I wanted to thank all of our Shenandoah National Park firefighters who take time away from their primary duties to help us on wildfires, prescribed fires, and projects. There are so many of them who dedicate their time to us. It's amazing. And I'd also like to thank all of our partner agencies who we rely on for mutual aid. We work well with the Forest Service. They help us when we need their aid. It's great to have the George Washington and Jefferson National Forests so close by. And we've also got great partners with the Fish and Wildlife Service, state agencies, local fire departments, you name it. And I'd like to also thank you all for joining us today. I really hope you all have some great questions for me in the Q&A. And this is just my works cited page. You know, nothing too special. I got a lot of images thanks to other park staff. A lot of the background images you saw were of fires in the park, and some of the more scientific information I got was from firescience.gov, which is also another great resource to check out if you're interested in some of the fire science. And with that,
Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah, that was wonderful.
Thank you.
We have a couple of questions coming in on the chat. I also have some questions from people who emailed them to me. So let's take them one by one. But first, I want to say thank you for that wonderful, thorough presentation, all that advice, the resources, and we will share all that information in the follow-up email when we send out the recording. So thanks for that. It was amazing. I learned so much. We have a question from Scott who asks if the cause of the recent Quaker Run fire was ever determined.
So the most likely cause was determined to be lightning. They did find a lightning strike tree in the area. It had been days since the lightning strike had happened, but what can occur is, you know, you've got just enough moisture and the right weather conditions that these fires stay dormant and then all of a sudden become visible a day or two later. Yeah.
Wow. There are so many things I never knew that you taught me just in these last 25
That's
minutes.
great.
We have another question from Walter who asks, does the NPS do any post-fire management to reduce the impacts of major fires on park streams like runoff or lands, for instance, the Rocky Run fire?
Yeah, so there's actually something called burned area emergency response. It's largely money that's requested from some of our other divisions in the park. So like the invasive plant crew can kind of request money, funding for a project to treat invasive plants post-fire. There are considerations for erosion control in the event of like a more intense fire. Sometimes they'll put berms down and things like that, temporary structures to kind of help catch that sediment. Yeah, there's a lot of post-fire efforts. Definitely.
That's great. And that was a great question. Thank you, Walter. I learned something about invasives and fire in your talk. And as you know, Bridget, the Shenandoah National Park Trust funds consistently year after year a lot of invasive species management programs, coordinators. We do insects. We do a chemical treatment when it's necessary, but we try to limit that. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about the invasive species management aspect of the park and how it dovetails with your work in fire management.
So there is a really large effort to control invasive species in the park. You know, this time of year, there's a crew that's going out 4 or 5 days a week to work on invasive plant treatments. I used to be on that crew. It was a lot of fun. And my position was, I think, as you mentioned, actually paid for by the trust. It was a 4-year term.
Thanks for the shout out.
Yeah. So post-fire, you really can see kind of a boom in invasive plant growth. You kind of can see that. I don't know if anyone's been up Newmarket Gap where you can see all the kudzu. This wasn't on one of our fires, but you can see it just, you know, it knocked it back, but now it's coming back in full force. So there will be efforts after a fire to get in and treat with herbicide. Typically, that's generally going to be your most effective method to reduce that regrowth and hopefully get ahead of it before it starts kind of overtaking the landscape.
Well, that's super helpful because now one of my nightmares now is that invasives get wackier and stronger after fires, which is,
Yeah.
yeah. So tell us, also, some people wondered, why did you choose fire as a career, especially because you had this other career trajectory, but you always maintained a connection to fire management. So could you talk a little bit about your background and your career trajectory?
Yeah, so I first became interested in fire when I was in my SCA internship. We actually had the opportunity to do a S212 wildland power saws class. And so that was my first time ever operating a chainsaw. And I thought that was such a great class and so interesting and kind of empowering. And then I ended up a few months later being offered an opportunity to take the S130, 190 basic firefighter class. And, I kind of never really knew at that point that wildland fire was actually a career option. I kind of thought it was largely up to municipalities to kind of control those fires. And it turns out there are, federal agencies that dedicate a lot of time and resources to these fires. And I just kind of got a little obsessed with it after that. I thought it was so interesting. And I got my red card, became a qualified firefighter type 2, and just kind of went from there. Ended up working at Piedmont National Wildlife Refuge as another SCA internship, and got to delve into prescribed fire a lot and go on my first fire assignment to Florida. So I just kind of went from there.
Well, that's really cool. Thanks for that little personal glimpse. We have two people asking about climate change. And as you recall, when we chatted before this call, that is something that popped into my mind too. So Tom asks, with a warming climate, are you expecting to see an increase in fire starts and fire intensity? And Carol had a similar question. Is there evidence that wildfires are increasing with climate change?
Yeah, so I do believe there's quite a bit of information out there about this, but with the warming climate, there are going to very likely be larger fires, more intense fires. The occurrence is going to increase, and that just makes it so much more important for land management agencies to be able to utilize prescribed fire, utilize fuels treatments to kind of try to mitigate some of these climate change risks.
Well, not the answer we want, but certainly good to be prepared.
Yeah.
Michael wants to know, what does an incident commander type 5 do?
Okay, so yeah, an IC5, so it scales from a 5 to a 1, the 5 actually being the most basic. You're basically going to be in command of an incident that shouldn't last more than one operational period. It might go into the following days as kind of mop up and control it, was making sure the fire's out and contained. But a small complexity, low complexity incident, maybe a wildfire that's anywhere from 1 to 20 acres or something like that. And your duty as the IC is to disseminate information, make sure you're keeping kind of the agency representatives informed, the communications center, supervisors, everything like that. And doing a size up on the incident. How large is the fire? What kind of additional resources are you going to need?
Wow. Well, Michael's question got me thinking about how the job is structured. So there are lots of terms that we listened to in your bio, like burn boss, engine crew, ignition, mop up, recon. So what's your favorite? Do you have a favorite? Or is it all what you love to do?
It's all pretty great. I really, I really do enjoy being on an engine. I think it's an interesting and effective way to suppress a fire, but ignitions are also kind of a lot of fun. If you're not familiar.
Yeah, I can't explain that term
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. So you could be using a firing device like a drip torch or a fusee. There's a variety of other firing devices as well.
For prescribed burns?
Yeah, prescribed
Gotcha.
burns. And then sometimes on wildfire incidents, Quaker actually being one of them, we ended up burning off of Rapidan Road to actually secure that fire line instead of letting the fire push to the road and create a kind of like a holding concern, a concern for it to slop over the road. So,
wow. You talked a little bit about the reasons for prescribed burns. Could you give us a little behind the scenes glimpse as to how the decision is made sort of structurally within the park? Our listeners enjoy getting a glimpse of how the park makes its decisions.
So a lot of these burns have been kind of planned out years and years in advance, and they revisit those plans periodically to make sure that we're still, meeting objectives and all of that sort of thing, making sure the plan still makes sense. But you basically make a really in-depth plan. You pick, an area that okay, this is kind of maybe a fire-prone area where we want to get ahead of it and do some fuel reduction, or, oh, this habitat would really benefit from some restoration from, low-intensity fire. Sometimes it's cultural reasons, like burning the battlefields. They like to do that in conjunction with mowing to kind of create like a little bit more of a mosaic, and also kind of just keep that character to the battlefield. Yeah.
Wow. There are things that you are explaining that I never thought of before, and I'm sure our listeners agree. We have time for one more question that I got in the Q&A about, you talked a lot about interagency cooperation, and former Superintendent Pat Kenny also talked about the help that they've received on recent fires. But we wondered, how do agencies decide when to participate, and how are decisions about resource allocation and collaboration made?
So those requests, for maybe a smaller fire where you have an IC5, you're going to request those resources through the communications center. You're typically going to get the closest, most available resource. And as a fire grows, that can mean, kind of far-reaching. We've had resources from California and other Western states that have come here to help us staff during high fire danger, come here for wildfires. And it's just a really great way to bolster staffing and help contain when we do get large wildfires.
Wow. Well, Bridget, thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise with us. We wish you well. We thank you for your service in the park. Please stay safe. And we'd also like to thank everyone who attended this evening's webinar. We try to do these periodically, share glimpses behind the scenes at Shenandoah, share some of the results of our projects and programs. Everybody who registered for this event this evening will be sent a recording of the program along with some of the resources we talked about today. And also, I'd like to ask you to please stay tuned, because very soon we're going to be announcing the projects and programs that the Trust is funding in 2025 and 2026. I can't even believe that I'm saying 2026, but yes, we will be announcing them. And finally, we would not be able to fund our work without our donors. You make our work possible. So I'd like to express gratitude to everybody who does support our work. And thank you for listening tonight. Have a great night. Thank you from everyone here at the Shenandoah National Park Trust. And thank you, Bridget.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.